formally welcome you all, and we have our three speakers, or three of our four speakers with us, Rachel, Oby and James, and people are still coming in, which is obviously good. As Dudley has said, this is an important area. The local authorities are the source of most business for many, many social care providers, and getting that relationship right and maintaining it correctly is very, very important. We've had a couple of questions posed prior to the meeting about international recruits and displaced workers. We don't have any particular update today, but if you've got any issues, please do contact either Dudley or myself, and we will aim to resolve those for you as far as we can. But there are those questions that we keep being asked, same questions, and the answers are always the same. And we have a couple of questions from dom care providers wanting to take people on. If you're working on 0 hours, the Home Office won't go for it. So they have to be fixed hour type contracts. Okay, we've got a lot to cover today, so we'll move on to the first presenter, and that's Oby. Oby runs an organisation that provides tender writing and support around whether you should bid or not to bid. Now, over the many years, Dudley and I have written a lot of tenders with a pretty good success rate, but tender writing has become a much more complex area. And also, to be honest, many people write bids for work they have no hope of getting. And you need to be pretty objective about whether you decide to spend money on either doing it yourself with the time and the effort, or getting somebody like Oby to actually do the work for you. Oby, over to you. And you are co-host, so you can share your slides.
Thank you, Peter. Good morning, everybody. And I am really happy to be here. So just to echo what you said, the tender writing space has become a more complex space. Certainly in my experience, I've seen the changes progress from when you could just rock up to the local authority to let them know that you've opened a business, and then they would just send you spot contracts, to the introduction of DPSs and all the other complexities that comes with it. So today, actually, Peter, I don't have a slide to share today. What I'll be doing is a demo of a tool. So rather than the traditional slides, I felt, I'm just going to go straight into it. So I'm just going to give a bit of background about myself. Currently, I identify as the founder of the HSCT portal, and that's a journey, and that's because that has led me to, I identify as that because that's currently what we're pushing. So my background is in business development and tendering. I started off in social care, working with a domiciliary care provider, and I was in charge of securing business for the organization. And of course, with the domiciliary care providers who are here today, they would know that regardless of whatever role you play, you still have to work on the front line. You have to pick up some shifts because sometimes staff let you down. And for continuity of care, regardless of your role, management or not, you have to step in sometimes. So what that meant for me is I had experience working on the front line. I started off as a tender writer, and that experience led me to really articulate or respond to requests from the evaluators as a from lived experience working on the front line. So during that process of tendering, we realized that there were lots of problems, especially as I was working with a small provider. And one of the issues we found was that it was quite difficult. Well, tendering on itself is quite a tedious exercise, comes with lots of documentation. It's quite complex to get through. And sometimes what you just want to know is, can I actually bid for this or not? And if I can, what are the things I have to provide, and all of that. So in that process, for me working as a business development officer to being a tender writer, that led me to what I'm about to show you now, which is the HSCT portal. So what we've done is we've provided a platform that has made it really, really simple for providers like you to go on there and search for multiple bids at the same time. It's free. And it's free. And lots of questions people ask us is, oh, okay, they ask us why it's free. So the reason it's free is because as a tender writing company, every single day we get requests from small providers of, am I eligible? What is this local authority saying? Questions that differ to what you would ask in the clarification questions. So rather than just responding to one individual or one organization, what we've done is we've taken that response for one local authority and we've uploaded it onto this portal that I'm about to show you to bring value to multiple people. So if you want to check if you're eligible for a tender, rather than calling us, you could just use the portal. So that's what I'm going to be showing today. And of course, I'm going to be here for the rest of the webinar. And if you have any questions about tendering, finding tenders, applying for tenders, and all of that, I'll be here. So I'm going to share my screen now. Okay, so this is what the portal looks like. Can I just check that my screen has been successfully shared? Okay, great. All right, so this is on the assumption that you have signed up. The sign up process is pretty simple. We ask questions that we see come up often, and what we do and what the system does is it checks it instantly against multiple tenders. And then it tells you at first glance, as soon as you land on your dashboard, the amount of tenders that you're eligible for right here, based on the information that you uploaded. And we check it against the total amount of tenders that are currently on our portal. As I speak today, we have 384. So it's what it does is it's checked it against the total amount of tenders on the portal. So this is a new service. So I want to put a disclaimer out there and say that this is pretty new. So we very much welcome feedback. And like I said, this was developed to support providers. We developed this tool so that you could use it with Proactis, BidStats, not BidStat, Proactis, Intent Host, and other bidding tools where you could submit your bids. So it's not to be used in isolation, it's to be used with Proactis and other bid writing companies. So you land on your dashboard and straight away you can see that there are 18 possible eligible tenders that you can apply for. So the good thing about it is when you, okay, if I could just navigate. Okay. So straight away, I'm trying to navigate Zoom as well. So please bear with me. Okay, I think I've managed to. So if I scroll all the way down, straight away you can see that at a glance, it tells you the percentage at which the information you uploaded matches your organization. So based on the information I uploaded, I have about 4 tenders here that it's in line with the local authorities, requirements for the minimum criteria. So if you click on it, it tells you why exactly you're eligible for it. So then you can use this information as part of your no bid or bid decision. So it tells you right here exactly why you meet the criteria. So then you can use this information to then go back onto Proactis and then have a look at the details have a look at the documents in details. So rather than going through hundreds of documents deciding whether or not you're eligible, you could just use this tool and it tells you at first glance, not just for one tender, for multiple tenders. And that's the value that we're trying to bring to providers. We're trying to save you time and we're also trying to save you money as well. Because what we have learned is a lot of times providers, they take a spray and pray approach, which is where they bid for lots and lots of tenders, whether or not they are eligible. But this is a filtration process for you. So you take this and you check against multiple tenders, and then you can start your bidding journey. So another thing I should add is this is up to date with FTS, which is the main website where every organization announces their tenders. So if FTS releases a tender today, we would update our portal to reflect that. And of course, this is a digital tool, but it's managed by humans, well, it's managed by humans. So the information on here is as accurate as possible. So I want to say, one final thing I want to add is that this is checked against the minimum criteria. So there will be other things. This doesn't mean your organization has the capacity to deliver. It just helps you save time. So rather than looking through multiple tenders, you could just sign up, and then at the first glance, it tells you straight away the amount of tenders that are available, that are live, and the percentage that your organization is eligible for it. It checks across the geographical requirements of the tender. It checks across the regulatory requirements and other things as well. So that's one less thing that you have to do as part of your bid or no bid decision. And then like I said earlier, this is new, so we definitely welcome feedback, questions, and all of that, because what we want to do is want to become a partner with providers and ensure that your bid writing process is both affordable and accessible. On here, you'd also see there are other things we have coming up, which is like finding experts and also having an actual writing workspace. But these are things that are going to roll out in the future. So I'm going to be posting our social media handle in the chat, and you could continue to follow our journey. And as we release features that are going to be beneficial to you, you could just follow our journey. All right, that's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Oby. As I almost forgot to turn the microphone back on. We'll put something on the website linking to that, and obviously it will be recorded so you can see it there and then. Just before we move on to any questions for Oby, what I would say is that we've had examples of providers who have spent up to £7,000 on bid writing, where they were guaranteed to get local authority business. And lo and behold, those bid writing companies were all based abroad when we looked into them.
Yeah.
So when it went wrong and they didn't get their business, but they had paid their £7,000, they had absolutely no recourse to get their money back. So be very wary of people bearing gifts and telling you that they will guarantee things for you, because as I'm sure James will cover, and also Rachel, there are no guarantees in this system. But do use the opportunity. If you've got any questions for Oby, please ask them now, or you may get those questions as we move through with the other presenters. Any questions for Oby?
Can I just add to what you just said, Peter? Because a lot of questions we get asked all the time is, especially from providers when they want to use our bid writing services, what is the guarantee? And the first thing we say is, of course, there are no guarantees, because if we guarantee you winning this bid, we can't guarantee you winning the bid, because as part of one of the things that you're supposed to sign is a non-collusion and yes, a non-collusion form. So nobody can guarantee you win any bids, because it means that you have been part of the tender writing process and you have information that you shouldn't have, because it's supposed to be a fair exercise. So I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, I
So
think
if anyone says to you they can guarantee you a bid, it's actually wrong and probably illegal.
Yeah, I think that is true. And I think it's the old line, if all else fails, read the instructions. And people will look at a tender document or bid document, which can be quite complicated, and they ignore the small print.
Yeah.
You ignore the small print, carry on. You're wasting your time and your money. Please read the preconditions before you move forward. Okay. Thanks again, Oby. We'll come back to that. And James.
Good morning.
Good morning,
Right,
James.
I'm not used to using Teams, to using Zoom. I normally use Teams, so you have to bear with me for a second. I've got a lovely presentation. Peter's asked me to come along and talk about commissioning. So, oh, where's that gone now? Oh, here it is. Right. Okay. And I just, can you see that?
Yes.
Okay, well, I can't see you, but I can see the presentation. So, I'm going to very quick presentation on what is commissioning, and I'm very happy to ask any questions at the end. Just for clarity, I'm a commissioner for the Royal Borough of Greenwich, and my speciality is home care, extra care housing, and prisons, and a few other bits and pieces that get thrown my way. I don't work for procurement. I'm not a procurement expert, but I can answer some questions on that as well. But predominantly for the past 8 or 9 years, I've commissioned home care and those kind of services for the local borough of Greenwich. So my job title is a strategic commissioning and development officer, which is more commonly known as a commissioning manager. So what is commissioning? Well, commissioning really is a cycle of process where we identify what services are needed for the local authority. We plan for those services, we assess the needs, we review those services, we decide how they're going to be commissioned, we shape the market, we look at what is affordable, what is quality, how we want to move forward, how we can drive collaboration, and then we review those services through monitoring and evaluation and effectively start that whole process again. So we are responsible for looking at what contracts needed. So specifically for me, it's what our home care contracts look like, how they will meet our demand, what we want to change, how we want them to deliver, what the tendering process is like, what the specification is like, and then we basically procure them, monitor them, evaluate them, and ultimately either extend contracts if we have the option or tender again. Now, I was going to talk very briefly about some contract types, and there's more contract types than this, but these are the most common ones that we use. So a framework contract, that's what our home care contract is. So a framework contract is where we've gone through a formal tendering process and we have a list of providers that have gone through that process. They have contracts with us, they have a specification with us, and there's normally quite nuances within those contracts. There's a fixed price, there's a quality standard people have to adhere to, and that guarantees us a level of quality and assurance and consistency, and it guarantees those providers a level of business for a certain amount of time. So they're the most common contracts that we use as a local authority. Then we have spot contracts, which are just one-off types of agreements with agencies. They're less common, especially in home care. They're slightly more common in my experience with care homes because of how they operate, but generally in home care, certainly in Greenwich, spot contracts are quite rare. We try and avoid them if possible because we try and stick with our framework contracts, and they're just one-off contracts. There's not normally as much in the specification, and the standards we expect, while still high, we don't normally have the ability to monitor them as much, and they can be higher cost as well. And then we have block contracts, which we use for some of our extra care, and we use also for some of our care homes, which is just effectively providers paid a set amount of money regardless of usage. So from
James, I think you need to move your slides on.
You should be on contract types.
It hasn't moved on from number 1, and I can't move them on.
Okay. What about now? Oh, hold on. This is why I don't like Zoom. So I don't know what's happened now.
You're right. That's it.
Oh, okay. Right. We'll just stick with it. So you should be able to see contract types.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks.
So they're the most common sort of contract types that we use in the borough. Block contracts generally are used, in my experience, for sort of home care provision. Some local authorities do use them for home care, and they are becoming slightly more popular. The issue with them doing for home care is you have to be able to know what the usage is, and that cannot always be predictable. They are good in some respects, but they can be a challenge. Then we have a procurement and tendering process. So once we've designed a specification, once we've done some market engagement, once we've understood what residents need, once we've understood what our direction of travel and our strategic endeavours are, we then have to go through a procurement and tendering stage. And as said by Oby and Peter, it's quite a long stage. It can be quite tedious. Effectively, it's the legal process we have to go through. It's the way I generally describe it as a very big job interview. What we will do during this stage is we will decide with procurement and our directors how the percentage of scoring is divided up. So typically, if you're doing a home care tender, you have 100% scoring. You know, that's the most you can achieve as a bidder is 100%. What we would decide is what we allocate to that 100%. So, for example, we might say that pricing is very important to us. So 50% of your overall score may be around pricing, around, you know, how you've been transparent with your pricing, how you can evidence the cost, whether you've come in high or low. It's not always about being the cheapest. It's about being transparent and sustainable. We will have a certain amount that is dedicated to social value. So what you give back to the local authority or the community around and how you will demonstrate that. And then we'll give a certain amount to the actual bid. So the actual questions that you're answering during that process. And they are scored by a multiple of people. It can be some commissioners, it can be frontline staff, and more it's being residents as well. So residents will have a say and be part of that interview process. The procurement stage is effectively we have a lot of applications. So the last time we did our home care contract, we had 150 applications at the outset, and it was awarded to 7 people, and that's done through several stages. And there's lots of checks in there. So we do financial checks. So we make sure that as a business you are sustainable. And we also make sure that you've got the ability to cope effectively with the level of money that would be involved in that. We look at normal stuff like CQC ratings. We make sure the policies are in place. So we do our due diligence there, and we also get references as well. This part it's all completely transparent. So once you get your instructions, you'll see how the score is broken down, and you'll see what part is done to quality. You'll understand the instructions. You'll get a copy of the questions, and then it's all published. Once it's decided and once the scores are done, it's all published, and then from there we can effectively sign contracts. So we're also responsible for market engagement and market management. So this is effectively where we engage with our providers in the market. So for home care, if we were doing a tender tomorrow, for example, we would, through Proactis or through the website, we will say that we're doing a large engagement with all, you know, for whoever wants to come along, so we can explain what we want to achieve from our tender, what we want the market to do, how we potentially want the market to change, if there's any gaps or opportunities there, understanding some barriers that there might be, and try and work together. So what we might want to see is a change in how services are delivered, or we might want to explain that we have always done something a certain way in the past and we want to change that, and that will affect you as a business. So this is how we would suggest that you change your business to be attractive to the local authority and to give you the best opportunity in the tender. So a good example of that is when we did the last home care tender for Greenwich. We wanted to reduce the number of 0-hour contracts because that was quite a big political ideology. So to do that, we did a big market engagement event, and we explained the process, and we explained what we wanted to see and about how we wanted to reduce those numbers and how that would look in the contract and how that might look in KPIs. And we did that well before we launched the tender, so it gave people the opportunity to understand whether that was feasible for them as a business, or how they might approach it to give them the best possible chance. We also do a huge amount of co-production and co-design. So this is where we will work with service users and residents so we can understand what they want from the services that they engage with, what they want them to look like. They can support us in designing those services for people with lived experience, how we make that engaging and what mechanisms we use. And they're also part of, certainly for Greenwich, they're part of the actual tendering process as well. So they're part of the scoring process. They can be involved in actually physically writing the specification and designing how those services look and what they want to see from providers, because ultimately they're the people that are engaging with them on a day-to-day basis. So from a commissioning point of view, what do we want to see? Well, generally speaking, we want good providers. It is absolutely of no benefit to us to have poor providers. We want providers that are of high quality and reliable and consistent. We do achieve that as much as we can through the procurement process, through our due diligence checks and through the market engagement process. We want providers that are coming along a journey with us if we are looking to make strategic changes to the way we deliver home care, or we have been transparent with the challenges we face. And that might be financial, that might be with a growing demographic, that may be with some neighbourhood work, it may be with integration. We want partners and providers that are able to come along that journey with us. We want providers that are open to change and innovation. So a big part of the move we're doing at the moment is around assisted technology. So we want providers to be on board with that. We want providers to align with us in our with our strategic direction and also with our values as well. So it's always worth looking at what the local authority's values are, and as a business, sort of understanding how you would align yourself with those values and how you would demonstrate that alignment as well. And the way we commission in Greenwich is changing. We're looking at doing more collaborative partnerships with providers. We're looking about how we can share some of the challenges we've got whilst making sure we've got a sustainable market. We are responsible for ensuring providers are sustainable as much as possible. We're looking at how we can involve residents more to help us come along with some of those challenges, how we can shape the market and how we could potentially move away from a traditional way of commissioning to looking at how we can shape the market to do more cooperative work. So how we can actually change the businesses and how they operate. That could be potentially us wanting to look at what value that those businesses give back to those that they employ, or how we could sort of integrate those businesses to our health partners as well, and how we can look at delivering them as one big model. There's a lot of work at the moment going on around neighbourhoods and creating neighbourhood teams, so that's another big part of that journey. Financial sustainability, both for the local authority and businesses, is a big part, and also how we can look at commissioning different ways of providing those services, such as direct payments or ISFs, and again, sort of co-op work, small local businesses. How we can get the third sector involved, sort of voluntary community-based organisations, and how we can strengthen that community work around there. And how we can look at as commissioning, we always look quite far into the future. So we don't necessarily look at what's happening now. We always look at what we will need in the future, in a year's time, in 2 years' time. But we're trying now to look even further than that, to build on that collaborative approach. And that's me done, Peter. I don't know if I'm sharing or not.
Right, thank you, James. There's a huge amount there. That was very comprehensive. I would doubt if there are providers here who can't learn something from that. So any questions, please, for James? I can't believe you've stunned everybody into silence.
Well, we aim to please. If there are any questions, I can stay to 11. So if there's any questions, I'm more than happy to answer, and I'm more than happy to share a copy of that. The slide pack with you, Peter, for you to share.
Yeah, that'll be good. I mean, those slides are very informative, and they cover I would say, and obviously we can't speak for other local authorities, but they would cover the basis of virtually every local authority tendering process.
And
And
it's
please,
and it's sorry guys, I was going to say it's worth pointing out, I work for Greenwich, and we have a certain strategic direction and we have a certain values, and that's not the same for every local authority. So some local authorities may focus higher on pricing. They may want a cheaper price due to their own challenges, or they may want they may focus less on certain areas. Greenwich, for example, we focus a lot on payment to carers, so we are London Living Wage payer. We focus a lot on how those relationships are going to develop around sort of the co-op model and things like that. But other local authorities aren't. So it's really important, if you are a provider, not to do, I do like Oby's expression of spray and pray. You can't really do that. You do really need to research the local authority and understand what's important to them. Because if you're going to be serious about having a tender, and it's not just about winning the tender, it's about maintaining that relationship as well. And it's about maintaining, when we spend a lot of time writing a specification and writing a contract, and we expect providers to come along that journey with us. We expect them to adhere to what that specification is. And if there's certain things in there, you have to be able to deliver it and evidence that you're delivering it. But different things are very different for local authorities. So what's important to Greenwich might not translate to what's important to Croydon, for example. So you need to really look at those values and what challenges they've got, and really read the specification. Because I haven't written it for fun. If I've spent 7 months writing it, I've not done it for fun. I've done it because we want providers to come along to do it.
I think there's a couple of points. I'm just sorry, Oby. I was just going to raise these points that are in the chat. I mean, the first one is are all local authorities expected to work to the standard you are in terms of feedback, etc.?
I'm not sure I understand that quite. I mean, the feedback in what term? In terms of the procurement process, or in terms of sort of collaboration, or?
I would think if Stuart can give us a bit more information on that, but over the years we've seen, for example, where a local authority outsourced the tendering process, so the feedback to providers was very poor, but most feedback is actually very good and very detailed. Stuart, are you able to elaborate on your question?
Hi, Peter. Thanks. And Peter, you've just hit the nail on the head there. That's exactly what I meant, because I've worked with other local authorities where you never hear back, and there isn't that sort of accountability. And I think as providers, it's sometimes difficult to challenge when you don't know what good practice looks like. So it's been helpful to just listen to your presentation there.
So I mean, again, I can only speak from my experience, but where we don't outsource our tendering. It's all done in-house, and I can't see that changing for us. But we always give feedback. Now, the level of feedback you will get will depend on how far you are in that process. So as an example, the home care one's the easiest one for me to give an example to. So the last home care bid we did, we had 150 people apply, and we did that during 2 stages. Now, we can give feedback for those that haven't passed the first stage, but the first stage normally is fairly simple. It's normally where we do our checks around sort of financial sustainability and CQC feedback, and we may ask 1 or 2 fairly basic questions. So at that point, if you failed, we would give you feedback on what you failed. So say, for example, you failed the financial checks, not suggesting you would, but if you did, we would give you some basic information on that. If you then got to the second stage, where we have reduced the number of people in that process, then we would give you detailed feedback, because that process then becomes more complicated, because then you're in the stage where you're answering more in-depth conversations, you're writing full bids, you're submitting prices, and at that point we would give you full feedback, and the scores, you're part of the process, we would give you the scores, and we would explain how the moderation works. And say 10 people scored one of your questions, each of those would then have individual feedback, and they would give an individual score, and then a moderator who would be independent of the process would moderate that score and say, you know, it should, you know, we try and come to a consensus, and they would write a paragraph or two on why that has happened. So the answer is you should get feedback. You're more than entitled to feedback, and that feedback should be transparent and it should be clear. And then at the end of the process, there should be some moderation around that. And then if you want to challenge that feedback, some of it depends on what you potentially haven't progressed for. But you, again, during the procurement process, you have what's called a standstill period where you can challenge if you feel you have a case. But it should be fully transparent and you should get feedback. We've always given feedback as much as possible. So I hope that answers your question.
I think that I can say that the feedback I've seen over the years has varied enormously. Some of it is extremely constructive and very helpful, and that there's even local authorities that have meetings afterwards for those that don't succeed. And we have actually heard providers say that they bid for work they didn't think they would get, but they wanted to know what the feedback was from the local authorities because they found it useful in how they develop their business going forward.
And we gave feedback before. We've met with providers around that process, and we're always more than happy to give feedback, because it's only ever constructive. If you're serious about staying in the social care sector, you know, ultimately we want good providers for people to succeed. So we have no issue with giving feedback. It does depend where you are in the process, though. That is a bit of a key sometimes. If you sort of fall at the first hurdle, like you've not passed the financial checks, that's generally quite binary. You know, I can't give a huge amount of feedback because that's done. That bit is outsourced. That bit around the financial checks is outsourced to like I can't remember the name of the company, D&B. They do Dun & Bradstreet checks.
And that it does fascinate me that when you talk to providers about tendering, the number of them have not heard of Dun & Bradstreet. They've not got a D&B number. Everybody can get that number. It's free, and it will give you some feedback. And also with providers don't check their credit ratings, which you need to do. We have over the years, excuse me, found credit ratings that have been incorrect. They're much better nowadays, but it's worth checking, because if your credit rating is not right, then you need to amend it. And also, particularly with dom care providers, it's not unusual for dom care providers in different areas to have very similar names. And we have seen where a dom care provider in area 1 has got the credit rating for dom care provider in area 2, because somehow they've got mixed up because their names are very similar. And surely somewhere along the line that shouldn't have happened, but it does. So please do check. And getting it resolved can be a little time consuming, but it is worth the effort. There's another question, which is actually quite a good one, I think. James, for home care providers preparing for local authority bidding, what would you say are the top 3 do's and don'ts they should keep in mind?
Okay, that's fairly easy. So number 1 is read the specification. So again, read it and understand it, and don't just understand it. And when you are writing your bid or asking someone to write your bid, don't play, as my grandmother would say, lip service. If for example that specification says something around wanting to achieve the best outcomes for residents through this, that and the other, you know, using the voluntary sector, engaging in a certain way, looking at faith groups, etc., whatever it happens to be, read it, understand it, and think how your business can do that or are doing that. And if you're not doing that, how you will do that and how you will demonstrate that. So that's the top tip, is always read the specification. Number 2 is understand the pricing model. So there can be a fallacy that local authorities want the cheapest. Now that probably is the case for some local authorities, but we have to make sure you're sustainable. There's no point saying, right, well, we can do that work for £14 an hour because we've got calculators and we can understand that you're not going to be able to do that. And you might, if you do win, the chances are you're going to be bankrupt within 6 months because it's not feasible. So be fully transparent with your pricing model. When we did the last, well, what we do with tenders generally is we will give providers a copy of the pricing model that we want them to use. So whether that's an ADAS pricing model or the LGA pricing model, we'll give them a copy of the model we want to use, and we will check that when it comes back, and we will make sure that it effectively adds up. There's no, you know, if you've done all your maths or whatever, and it comes out at £20 an hour, for example, and that's a sustainable rate, and that shows investment, and that shows you're paying carers properly, and whatever, we would much prefer to see that than if you come back and go, it's £15 an hour, but that's not possible, you know. So try and be realistic and not greedy with your pricing model. Try and be as accurate and realistic as possible and transparent. So understand that. Number 3 would be read the tendering questions carefully. So if you've got a question in there that I can't really think of an example, but if you've got a question in there and it's 1,000-word limit, you don't have to use the 1,000 words, by the way. You can, you know, if you can answer it less than that, answer it in less, but read it very carefully. Don't rush it. Think of it as an exam and a job interview all in one, and always think about how you will evidence that and how you can evidence that. That's very, very important. And if you can't evidence it because it may be something that you're not doing but you would do, that's fine. Be transparent and just say, well, we don't do that at the moment because we've not had experience, but this is how we'll research it, this is how we would engage, and this is how we will demonstrate that we're doing it. So carefully read the specification. That is number 1. Carefully look at the pricing and be honest and transparent with it, and carefully read the tendering questions. That's the top 3. Don't the spray and pray. Don't just apply for everything because you'll be disappointed a lot of the time. That's number 1. Don't apply for everything. There's no harm. I would do, as much as they frustrate me when they come in, freedom of information requests. So there's no harm in asking a local authority what gaps they have in the market and what challenges they face. That will give you an idea of what the tender might look to address. So don't just do a spray and pray approach. Don't promise things that you can't deliver. You know, if everyone has challenges, generally speaking, you know, I personally am fairly pragmatic with specifications and stuff. So if I write down 100 things that I would like an agency to do, I'm fairly realistic that, you know, they're not going to be able to do every single one perfectly because things change. And don't be rigid. Don't think, you know, dom care is changing and the way things are being done are changing. Things are becoming more digital. You need to be able to roll with the times, look at how you will change. So try not to be rigid. Hopefully that answers it. And then do local authorities show any preference between awarding contracts to franchise operators versus independent? That's a very good question, by the way. Franchise operators versus independent providers, or is it a valuation purely based on capability compliance criteria? Well, that's a really good question because it's a bit of a challenge for us. So one of the challenges, if you've got a little local business called James's Home Care that is fairly small and local, and I do really good services, mainly privately, and I might have 1 or 2 bits of council work. I'm not a big business. And you've got a really big business called Peter's Home Care, which is part of a franchise model that has 100 branches nationwide. Peter's business has all the money in the world to effectively generally be better at tender writing, and that is one of the issues we have, because the process is purely based on evaluation, capability, compliance with the criteria, the tendering, the pricing, etc., etc. But that's not a perfect system, because through a franchise, for example, they may be able to have better technology or be more fluid with their pricing because they could potentially take a loss in another contract, and that build their business. So it is a challenge. We don't show preference. We're not allowed to say you can't be a franchise if you're involved here. We could and we do look at ways that we can encourage local providers and smaller businesses to apply. We try and do that through market engagement. We try and do that through the specification. So if we, for example, wanted to have more local businesses apply rather than large franchises, we might decide that we will break up a neighbourhood of care so that there's less people that you would potentially deliver to, and that might not be attractive to a bigger business. That might be more attractive to a small local provider. So it is a challenge, and it's not a perfect system because bigger companies do have more money to throw at tenders, and they will often employ their own bid writers, and they will often understand very, very clearly what to say, in a bid to get a high score. So it can be a challenge.
Oby.
Hi, Peter. James, your session was so comprehensive. I was actually taking my own notes, so thank you. So yeah, so we deal with lots of providers, as you know, through our platform and by the service we provide. So I want to ask you a few things. So we've worked with providers who who have the capacity to provide excellence services, and they have been unsuccessful. So when you mentioned having when you spoke about the actual bid writing process by its design being a little bit flawed, I understood that. So sometimes we're working directly with providers and we know they can provide this, we know they can provide the service. And from your stats, you have 150 people as an example, bid for a tender, and you awarded only 7. So what happens to other providers who can actually contribute to the community, or the smaller providers? You mentioned the neighborhood teams, ISF, and that made me smile because I feel like we don't talk about that more. And there aren't enough ISF bids because there are smaller providers, niche providers who could actually pick up more niche packages and who are more passionate than even bigger providers. So how can they, what advice would you give them? And is there anything that they can do in the event that there is a tender out there, they are unsuccessful, and how can they still bring value to the community?
Oh, that's a very good question. So to be fully transparent, sometimes it can be, it is a brutal process. If it's 150 applied and we've awarded to 7, there's going to be 143 people that we can't engage with. My advice would be, you are absolutely right, because it can be a flawed process, and that process is done through scoring and evaluation, and it can't be a process where I just decide who gets in and I do all the scoring, because that's not fair. It has to be, it's a lot of people who do that scoring, and everyone's entitled to their own opinion and bits and pieces. I have worked, so we do work with providers. So once we start getting to those stages and we sort of think, well, Oby's home care, actually, they might not have scored particularly well on social value, for example, that they might not have scored particularly well, and that brought their whole score down. They just missed out and they were number 8 in 7. We would, and we did have backup providers. So if we have a provider that fails, we will then within a certain period, we can then come to Oby and go, okay, you were 8th, there's now this opportunity. We do look at talking to them about how they can diversify their market and be sustainable. We don't want providers to fail. So it might be, we would say to providers, well, look, you're not in this tender, but there is another tender coming up, which might be for learning disability, for example, when you demonstrated how you were really good with that particular cohort of service users, so you could strengthen that a little bit. We do try and give people as much feedback as possible. We do work with providers that have. We have got examples where we have, during the last process, we do work with those providers that were runner-ups, so to speak, and we will engage with them. Being niche in the market is always good. Trying not just to be, a home care provider. In Greenwich, there's about 198 registered home care providers. So every week I will get a home care provider email me saying, can I have a contract? And obviously the answer is no, you can't. You have to build your business first. You have to try and build it through direct payments. We will pass your details on to our direct payments team. So stuff like moving with the times, things around personal assistance, ISFs, stuff like that, thinking about how you can be, niche effectively is that option. A good example is in the last tender we had a couple of runner-ups that scored really, and when you get to those tender things, you're talking sometimes about less than 1% that can differentiate between
Absolutely
becoming, winning a bid and not winning a bid. It can be very, 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 very small. We contracted with those providers to do other services for us, so those providers now operate a rapid response service for us, and they've done exceptionally well. So they didn't win in that tender, but they came so close that we were able to do a direct award for another service. But it's sometimes you've just got to roll with the punch. You just got to learn from it. Always try and get feedback. Try and be a bit niche. Try not to be a normal, quote unquote home care provider. That's the challenge. And there's no harm in asking local authorities, what gaps do you have? We were really close. Is there anything else we can work with? Is there any opportunity to work with the providers that did win to perhaps create some sort of business that way? We do, that's perfectly allowed. If you've got two small organisations that are really good and they want to join forces to be a sort of a model in that way, that's absolutely acceptable. It's a difficult market, Oby home care. It's a very very overprescribed market. So standing out is the challenge. And
absolutely. Of course, I ask because, as you know, we do get lots of people reach out and they want to write bids which you don't qualify for. So we're constantly in that dialogue of actually, yes, go and build your business up. You will fill this tender. You're not eligible. Well, we also have seen providers who they have either been clinicians or even former commissioners or whatever the case may be, and they feel like, okay, I actually want to now go in and make, maybe not former commissioners, but you get the gist of what I'm trying to say.
No, I
know. So I just wanted to know, but you've explained it very articulately, so thank you. That's what I wanted to know. And I also just wanted to, just one final note from me, because every time we engage providers, we always emphasize how important the service specification is, and we even go one step further and we have meetings with them to discuss it. But a lot of times it's more like, oh yes, you guys are the bid writers, you just do it. So I loved when you said it took me 7 months to write this, and it's for good reason. Read it, understand it, and even if you're not successful and you are a runner-up, because of how good your response is, and you can actually show, because it will come through if you have shown that you've read it, you understand it, you can actually, if the local authority awards this contract today, you can mobilize. It does show, it does come through. And if you're not successful, you can still be a partner because you've given the local authority the confidence that you can bring value. So I just wanted to add how important that is, because we have lots of providers on here, and sometimes I feel from my experience that they don't actually see the value in, even if you are going to contract a bid writer, still have that engagement about understanding what the local authority actually wants, because you're going to be the one delivering it. And we're seeing more cases where we have won bids for providers, but they can't sustain it because they didn't actually understand it. They went in it just to get the business, but they didn't actually understand the strategic objectives, and they've lost the contract. So because there's
and that does happen. We do, we will remove people from contracts if they don't deliver what they said they're going to deliver.
Yeah, exactly.
It can be harsh, but it's one thing winning it, and it's another thing sustaining it. So you have to be able to be sure that you can sustain it and you can do it. And it's all in the, I mean, in some respects, it's easy. It's written down for you what you've got to do. There's a set, that's this, it might be 45 pages, but there is a set of instructions what we want to see. So you have to be able to do it. And I think if you've got a tender, if a business, if you go to a tender writer and they say, don't apply, then don't apply. That's a bit harsh, but it's true. I've got a couple of minutes for the last two questions. So if a provider is not on your framework or supporting an individual, what do you usually do? Would you get the service user to change? Would you advise they go to direct payment? Personally, we wouldn't add them to a framework because our framework is a closed framework. Again, other local authorities may have an open framework. An open framework is where you can be added at a later date. We operate a closed framework. Again, there's no harm in emailing the commissioner and asking them. They will have certain criteria if they've got an open framework for you to apply. In Greenwich, we would say a direct payment. In some circumstances, if you are a good provider and you provide a niche service to that person, and that person can't go elsewhere and hasn't got the capacity to have a direct payment, then we would spot contract with you. It depends sometimes on the circumstances and the local authority. And the last one is, how important is the ability for providers' technology to integrate local authority systems? Does it influence scoring in an A bids? It's going to depend very much on what that local authority has written in their specification. So some local authorities will say that your ECM, if you're using electronic monitoring, which you all should be, by the way, has to integrate with the local authority. They may even say you have to use CM 2000, for example. Other local authorities will say it doesn't matter what ECM you use, as long as you do use an ECM. We might say doesn't matter what ECM you use, but we want to have access to it. So it very much depends on the specification. Again, it comes back to reading it. And do you spot contract for supported supported living services outside the local area? Our supported living market for Greenwich is massively overprescribed. We've got far too many supported living providers than we actually need. So personally, no, we don't. But that's not to say other local authorities don't. The supported living market, if anyone's interested in going into that at the moment, particularly in the southeast, is very overprescribed. There's far more providers than we actually require, and there's far more providers opening up, doing very vanilla services, not being niche. You need to be niche in that market. You need to be able to demonstrate. You need to go to a local authority and say, I'm thinking of opening up a supported living, before you even put your hand in your pocket and buy anything. Say, I'm thinking about opening up supported living. I'm thinking about doing a home care. What gaps in the market are there? Is it for older LD? Is it for younger mental health? Is it for care leavers? Is it for this? Is it for that? And they will be open with you and they will say, we have gaps here. So at the moment, that supported living market is overprescribed with sort of standard providers. You need to diversify that market slightly in South East. I can't talk for everyone. I can only talk for Greenwich.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, James. I'll be in contact, and lots there. There's a couple of questions that we'll pick up later in the event. And once again, thank you very much.
Thank you. I do need to leave. I do apologise.
No,
Such is commission's way.
Well, we've got plenty more to go at. So let's move on to a legal viewpoint of the whole process. Rachel, the screen is yours.
Thank you, Peter. Let me try and share my slides. Okay, hopefully that's worked. Can you see the slides now? Great. Hi everyone, I'm Rachel Crean. I'm a partner in the litigation team at VWV. We're a law firm who specialise in acting for health and social care providers. I'm going to talk to you on 3 topics today. One is to give you a bit of an overview of the procurement regimes that apply to you. And as I'll come on to, it's quite complicated for you at the moment. I'm then going to go through my top tips from having acted for a number of providers over the year to bring challenges against procurement decisions and having supported commissioners to get it right or defend challenges. And then I'm going to end with common contractual issues around payment, and what we're talking about there is what happens if you don't get paid. So the reason procurement is complicated for you at the moment is there's 3 possible regimes that the procurements that you're participating in could fall under. So for years and years, public procurement's been governed by the Public Contracts Regulations 2015. I'm going to call those the PCR 2015. In February of this year, the Procurement Act 2023 came into force, and that has largely replaced the Public Contracts Regulations. It's an updated version of the rules covering public procurement, but there's quite a lengthy transition period, as I'll come on to, which is why you still need to bear the PCR in mind. There's now, as of 1st of January last year, there's a breakaway regime for healthcare services, and that's covered by the Healthcare Services Provider Selection Regime regulations, and I'm going to call those the PSR. So nicely complicated for you at the moment. So when you turn to think about which regime applies, if the Commission is working under a framework that's been established for some time, that was established pre-February 2025, when the new Procurement Act came in, then you need to look at the old rules, the PCR 2015. So I had a look on Find a Tender Service when I was preparing the slides, and there are a lot of frameworks out there that are still running that were set up under the old rules, so these old rules will apply. It's also possible that a commissioner will be thinking about varying contracts that were commissioned under the old rules, and again, the old rules apply to those variations. If there are new procurements happening, or if there are frameworks that were set up after 25th of February 2025, then the Procurement Act is likely to apply. And if you're varying any of those new contracts or frameworks, again, the new procurement rules apply. And then there's the breakaway regime for healthcare services. I suspect this will cover less of the work that you do, but it may be relevant, so I thought it was worth mentioning. The PSR applies where the commissioner is procuring relevant health, I'm quoting from the regulations here, relevant healthcare services for the purposes of the health service in England. So essentially, if a commissioner is procuring NHS healthcare services, the PSR rules should apply. Now, social care is outside of scope generally, but the PSR has a list of the CPV codes that it applies to, and some of them are potentially relevant for you. So things like residential nursing care services and residential health facility services are both listed under the PSR. But in the main, I would expect most domiciliary care and most care home placement contracts to be commissioned under the main regime rather than the PSR. The tender documents that you see there, so the tender notices, the ITT, will specify on the face of them which procurement regime the commissioner believes apply, but they do sometimes get it wrong. So it can be worth double checking if you're unhappy with the outcome of a tender or unhappy with how it's going. So I spoke to a lawyer a couple of months ago who acts for NHS hospital trusts, and these are trusts which have their own legal team, they have their own specialist procurement team, and he'd had 3 cases come across his desk from these kind of hospitals where a procurement had been carried out under the wrong regime. It really can be quite tricky to work out which regime applies, particularly where there's a mixed procurement. And if a hospital trust can get it wrong, who are commissioning healthcare services all the time and have the support, then a local authority definitely can get it wrong too. Okay, just briefly looking at how local authorities can commission under the different rules. So the PCR 2015, the old rules, that should only apply to existing frameworks. The Procurement Act 2023, if the commissioner is commissioning over certain thresholds, at the moment £663,540 over the life of a contract, then they need to carry out a competitive process unless some exceptional circumstances apply. And I pulled out a couple that might be relevant. One is that a direct award can be made without running a competitive process if there's only one provider who can provide the service that they're trying to commission. And the other is a new direct award justification for user choice contracts. And here the contract must be for user choice services, and the commissioner must be under a legal obligation under a set of rules or regulations to have regard to the views of the individual receiving the services or their carer when they're selecting the supplier to be awarded the contract. The system under the PSR is really very different. So under the main procurement regime, the commissioner generally has to follow the competitive process provided they're over threshold, and only occasionally will exceptional circumstances apply, meaning they can make a direct award. Under the PSR, the commissioner is encouraged to start by thinking about what direct award options they might have. And only if none of those are available to them or they don't want to use them, do they consider any sort of competitive process. I'll run through the 5 options very quickly because it may only come up infrequently for you. So under the PSR, the commissioner can make a direct award A, which is where there's only one provider who can deliver the service. They can make a direct award B, where there's an unlimited number of contracts that can be given out. So an example would be an ophthalmic contract. They can make a direct award C, which is it gives them the option of essentially rolling over existing arrangements. So if they have a contract with a provider for provision of healthcare services and it's going well, the provider's meeting their contractual requirements, and they think that if they were to award a new similar contract, that position would continue, they continue to do well, then there's the option of making a direct award of a contract on similar terms. Then turning to the competitive processes, there's the most suitable provider process, under which the commissioner can draw up its own shortlist and then choose between the providers on their shortlist, and a competitive process, which is the usual system of inviting tenders and comparing bids against each other. So why is it important to you? Why am I telling you about the different rules that apply? In many ways, all 3 regimes are very similar. There's some same kind of overarching principles that apply around transparency, fairness, and equal treatment. And those were words that James was using in his talk earlier, talking from a commissioner perspective. However, if you come to challenge decisions made by a commissioner as part of a procurement, then the route of challenge and the timings of bringing a challenge are quite different. So I thought it's worth running through those. So under the main procurement regime, under the PCR 2015 and the Procurement Act, court proceedings have to be issued really quickly if you want to be able to bring a challenge. If you want to have the possibility of winning the contract, then you need to issue your court claim before the end of the standstill period. And even if you get extensions to that, the court claim needs to be issued within 30 days of the date on which you knew or ought to have known about the breach. Pausing there, what this means is it's possible that you became aware of a problem with the way the procurement was being run at an early stage, at a point when you were still in the running for being a winner of the procurement, and you might have to issue your court claim to challenge what's going on before you know whether you're even a losing bidder. So it may be at a point when you think you still got a good chance of winning. The rules are different under the PSR. You can wait until the outcome letter has been issued, until the standstill period has started, and only if you know that you haven't been successful, then issue a challenge. That's not to say that's always the right thing to do. So there may be factors such as if you're the incumbent, it may be better to let the whole thing play out. But if you're at an early stage and about to spend lots of time and money participating in a procurement, then you may still want to challenge early and not waste your time. The way in which you challenge is also quite difficult. So under the PSR, you request an internal review of what's happened, an internal review of the area where you think there's been a breach, and that's carried out by the Commissioner themselves. And then only if you're unhappy with the outcome of that internal review do you refer it to an external panel. The timescales are quite short. You've got 8 days following the notification of outcome to request the internal review. And after the internal review's happened, you've only got 5 days to send it to an external panel. Under the main procurement regime, the only route for challenging is to run off to court. So I know one of the things that causes lots of concern is the low fees that are sometimes being offered in procurement processes. And I've got clients that I've talked to who are complaining to me about the same price being offered for services for years and years and years. And there are ways that you can try and tackle the Commissioner on it. One way is through market engagement, again, something that James talked about. This is your opportunity to talk to the Commissioner, to raise questions if you're about how the pricing is going to work, to raise concerns if you think it's not affordable, and have discussions about how they think it's possible for the service to be delivered for the price they're offering. There's also the clarification questions process, which is another chance for you to ask questions and raise concerns. I also wanted to mention abnormally low tenders. So if the procurement is being run under the old rules, the PCR 2015, so this will apply to lots of frameworks that are still out there, the Commissioner had an obligation to identify the risk of abnormally low tenders and to ask questions of the bidder, including seeking explanations from the tenderers regarding their proposed prices and costs, and a breakdown of how they've calculated their price. And if the bidder doesn't satisfactorily account for the low price, the Commissioner may reject it, and in certain circumstances they were required to reject it if they could see that they'd cut corners in a way that wasn't permissible. Now, this is no longer appears in the new rules, but that doesn't mean you can't ask questions along the same theme. And it's about asking, but it's pointing out to the Commissioner why you think the price is too low for anybody to actually be able to afford to deliver the service, and asking questions about whether it means there's potentially non-compliance with requirements under the contract or legal requirements, or is there a risk of insolvency? Again, something James said, Commissioners do think about what's the point in giving a contract to the lowest bidder if they're making a loss and are insolvent within a matter of months. But it is a difficult area, and I appreciate that you are limited in what control and what power you have here. But I really think the main power you have is to be asking questions. So turning to my top tips, it's to use the market engagement, and it's partly the opportunity to ask questions, but it's also to make sure you understand the service that's being procured and whether this is a contract that you should be spending your time and money putting in a bid for. And as was touched on earlier, you don't want to be selected for a contract that you then have difficulty performing, leading to a contract termination. Sometimes you have to declare contract terminations when you're bidding for the next contract, so really important not to get that wrong. Use the clarification questions process. If there's any questions that you don't understand at the outset, this is your one and only opportunity to ask questions. So I can't emphasize enough the importance of querying things you don't understand. Hopefully you've got a good Commissioner who will answer questions properly. I've seen one set of clarification question and answers recently where the answer to every question was to cut and paste the section of the ITT that had been asked about, which was deeply unhelpful. But most Commissioners are quite good at answering, because they want their procurement that they've invested lots of time and money in to work and to not be challenged at the end. When it comes to writing your bid, it's sort of the advice you had as a school kid when you were taking exams. Read the question properly, answer the question that's been asked. Quite often I see very experienced bidders, the providers, caught out by this, where sometimes the question that's been asked isn't the best question, isn't quite the right question for the service that's being commissioned, and they then answer the question that they think should have been asked rather than the one that has been asked. Don't fall into that trap. Look very carefully at what you're being asked to describe. Remember, the commissioner will only look at what is written down. They won't bear in mind your track record that they're aware of outside of what's written down on the paper. So again, I've had conversations with clients where they're looking to challenge the outcome of a bid where they've been unsuccessful. They can't believe the low score they've received for an area of their service that they know they do really exceptionally well on. They're on a call with me quoting stats at me about how quickly they respond to different types of requests and what scores they get on things. And I'm asking them, where's that written down in your bid? Why didn't you write that down? It's so important that everything good you have to say is put down on paper. Think about how your bid will be evaluated. Make sure you understand how the scoring will be done. Answer all parts of the question and have regard to the award criteria. Look carefully at the points available and the word count. So if the word count is 1,000 words and you've written 200, think about whether that means you haven't given enough detail to be able to get the level of scoring that you want. Consider the points available as well to see what kind of weight the commissioner's putting on it. Plan to submit early. I know that's an obvious one, but I would encourage you to kind of build that into your timetable. I've had clients caught out by internet outages, which have prevented them from submitting a bid that they've spent a few weeks and lots of money preparing. I've also had clients who've made human error, silly mistakes when they're doing things in a rush. So often people will write their bid on a separate Word document and cut and paste it onto the portal. I had a client last week who described having cut and paste the answer to question 1 into the portal for question 1 and 2. And once the deadline's passed, there's nothing they can do but plead with the commissioner. And if you do want to challenge the outcome of a procurement, act fast. Don't sit on your concerns because there are some tight time limits involved. You need to have a think about which regime applies, which rules apply to you, and consider the timing of your challenge. What are the pros and cons of challenging during the process, raising questions during the process, or waiting until the outcome? So turning on to concerns around lack of payment. So my first case for a care home was, I think, 9.5 years ago. They hadn't been paid by it was an NHS commissioner for 6 residents of their care home, and they'd been underpaid for 5 of them, where there was a disagreement over the level of funding that level of care that these clients required. And they were owed £350,000. It totted up to a huge sum. It took 2 rounds of mediation to reach a resolution. The client themselves had spent months and months trying to get answers and movement out to the commissioner. We then had lots of back and forth between lawyers. And it was only when we got into the room for the first mediation and had the commissioner across the table from us that they finally started to engage. And they asked questions and asked for some paperwork that they hadn't asked for in the previous months and months of back and forth. The care home was pretty organised, so they produced the paperwork within about 10 minutes, and the commissioner realised they were on the hook. And they realised they turned up to mediation without authority to settle the case for the kind of sums that it was going to take. So we all had to go away and wait for 9 months while they applied to the Treasury for permission to offer us a higher sum of money. So at a second mediation day, 9 months later, a deal was done, and the client received a substantial proportion of the money they were owed. And I just think it's a good example of how difficult it can be to get paid, even when you complied with your contractual obligations and you've delivered care in good faith. And lack of payment has been a recurring theme that I've helped clients with ever since. I'm conscious that you often have to be mindful of your relationship with the commissioner. You don't want to be labelled as difficult. You don't want to be branded a troublemaker. But I really do think there's a way to be firm and robust and stand up for yourselves. Also behave in a professional and reasonable manner, and maintain that good working relationship with the commissioner. I'm going to start with avoiding arguments, because that is far preferable to spending time and energy and getting stressed about a dispute, far preferable to having to involve lawyers. The first bit of advice is to read your contract. I know it's obvious, but lots of people don't, because they're so lengthy. Lots of people don't have a copy of their contract. So step one might be to ask the Commissioner for it. Ideally, I want you to read it front to back, get a highlighter out, sit in a quiet room. There'll be bits you can skip over, but there'll be bits that are describing processes you should be going through on a daily or weekly basis, and that are really crucial to you getting paid. And those are the ones I want you to highlight and focus on. A common theme in arguments around payments is that the process in the contract hasn't been followed. I often have such sympathy for the provider, because it can be that you followed the same process, not the one written out in the contract, but the same process tens or hundreds of times, and then all of a sudden, out of the blue, the Commissioner is saying they're not going to pay for it because you haven't completed the right paperwork in line with the contract. Perhaps worse, you also get providers who've been pressured into accepting a new client on a Friday night, on a Sunday night, and you've essentially, in good faith and out of kindness, agreed to help, and then now you find yourselves funding the care yourselves. So I can't emphasize enough the importance of reading your contract and following the process that's set out in there. If you read your contract and you don't understand any terms, don't ignore them. Ask a friend, ask a colleague to read and help you try and interpret it. Ask the Commissioner, potentially, but be mindful that the Commissioner will have their own agenda and will want to interpret the contract in a way that's most favourable to them. Send a message to Peter and colleagues at Lcas, ask them for help. But yeah, the most important thing is don't ignore it and think it doesn't matter. It might have crucial terms in there. So whilst my advice is follow the terms in your contract and dig in your heels if someone's asking you to cut corners, I appreciate that this is not always possible in practical terms, and also that you might need the business, so might be willing to take a risk on not following the right process to make sure you fill a bed. So where you're not following the process in your contract, the next best thing is to obtain written confirmation from somebody of what's been agreed. The person you need to get that written confirmation from is someone who has authority to be giving you assurances around payment. So think about, do they work at the organisation that they are saying is going to pay for the service? If they don't, that doesn't really work. Think about what role they're in. So to give you a silly example, the receptionist from hospital won't have the right authority, but there'll be other levels of people who you think possibly or definitely do. If in doubt, ask them if they've got authority, ask them to put that in their written confirmation. And then at a minimum, in the written confirmation, I'd want to see that they're confirming the placement or the care will be funded. They'll specify the date from which the funding will start, specify who's going to fund the care, and address any unknowns. If you're going into it knowing there's some things yet to be resolved, I think put those down in writing, and whatever you've discussed about how they're going to be resolved, put that down too. If you're having trouble getting someone to put that in writing for you, you can write to them and ask them to just send a one-liner, yes, this is agreed. There's also potentially the option of recording a conversation rather than writing it down, but I'd recommend you get their permission before you do that. So that's trying to avoid the arguments. If you're beyond that point and you're in a dispute and payments are not being made, I would again recommend that you look to your contract, because there should be a dispute resolution process set out in there. And you should be able to find it looking at the index or word searching for dispute. And it usually sets out a process which is designed to be helpful in resolving disputes. And I wanted to run you through a typical sort of clause, what I typically see, so that you can see that it's accessible to you. It's something you can use. So typically there'd be an initial requirement for you to document the breach. So often it's to serve written notice of breach detailing how the Commissioner is in breach, in what way are they in default, what action do you want to take, what kind of response or remedial action do you need, and specifying the timescales on which you want them to take action. Sometimes, but not always, that first stage will also detail, it'll have some provisions around negotiation. So it might provide for negotiation to happen at a few different levels and for a certain number of days to be allowed for each level of negotiation. If that initial stage is unsuccessful, then contracts often provide for mediation to happen. So mediation is a face-to-face or online meeting with the opposite side, and you're helped by a neutral third party, a mediator, whose role it is to guide the discussion between you and encourage compromise. The mediator is not there to decide who is right and wrong. They're not going to tell you what to do. They're just there to kind of facilitate the discussion. A good mediator will be quite pushy in encouraging you to on both sides move slightly from your position in order to reach a resolution. Mediation can be great. We use it, lawyers use it a lot to help clients. We find that most of the cases that my team deal with are either resolved through negotiation between the individuals involved or between lawyers or via mediation. And if cases we're involved in escalate to court or arbitration, the vast majority of those end up settling at mediation rather than going all the way to trial. So it has pretty high success rates for resolving disputes. You do usually have to compromise from your position in order for mediation to be successful, and you need to bear in mind the kind of time and energy that you're putting into the dispute and the benefits that you get if you compromise and bring things to an end. If mediation doesn't work, then often the contract would provide for escalation to some sort of third party who will make a decision about who's right and wrong. And that would often be escalating to court for a judge to decide, to arbitration for an arbitrator to decide, or to expert determination. And it will specify what kind of person should be appointed as an expert to make the decision. So you can see that the initial stages of this are things that you can do yourselves. If you're getting involved in any court proceedings, anything other than a straightforward money online claim, I would encourage you to involve lawyers. And if the sums at stake are high, then it can be proportionate appropriate to get lawyers involved right from the start of the dispute. The other point I wanted to mention was under the main procurement regime and under the Procurement Act that came in earlier this year, there is a new obligation on commissioners outside of whatever's written in your contract to pay within 30 days of usually of the invoice being issued. And this works if the invoice isn't challenged, but it's something that you can potentially use in your initial back and forth with the commissioner to remind them of this obligation before matters escalate. The final point I wanted to mention, because it's come up recently for a client, is what to do if there's an argument between two different local authorities as to who is responsible for funding a client. And it came up in this case that I was involved in because the client who'd gone into my client's home had been resident of another previous care home for decades. So it was quite complicated to work out where they'd been resident before they'd entered that previous home and to work out who should be responsible. There were two local authorities. They kind of narrowed it down to two possibilities, and they were arguing about who was responsible for funding. And while they were having this argument, neither of them were paying. This absolutely should not be your problem. The guidance on this is clear that you should be paid by one of the local authorities while the argument is paying out, and they can then work it out amongst themselves if the wrong local authority has paid. So if this situation arises for you, do get on and escalate promptly through the dispute resolution provisions to put pressure on the local authority to pay you. Good. Okay, that was all my topics for today. I suppose the other thing I wanted to encourage you all to do is not be afraid to pick up the phone to a lawyer. Any reasonable lawyer should be happy to have a conversation with you about whether or not you need legal input and whether or not they can help. So without trying to bill you for that conversation, because they don't yet know whether they're needed. So yeah, please do feel free to contact if you want to talk over any queries.
Fantastic. Thank you, Rachel. There's been a huge amount of information this morning, and I'd be surprised if there aren't any questions. It could be that some of the people on the meeting don't perhaps want to raise the issues about non-payment in a sort of a general forum. If they'd like to go through the back door, they've got your contact details, or they can come to us and talk it through there. But we are aware, Dudley and I have both been contacted by providers who are struggling for payment, and that seems to be an increasing area. But please, if anyone's got any questions, do ask them. And we still got Oby with us as well. And there's several points we need to cover before we move on to skills for care. So any questions about local authorities and about payment? You must have a question, Dudley. You've always got a question.
I always have a question, but I don't want to, one thing I will say, and sorry, I've been trying to manage. It's a Wednesday where everyone has 101 meetings at the same time, and as you can imagine, the plight of social care is very busy. What we're finding is not just it's a nationwide thing in regards to individuals receiving payment. The problem you have, and Peter will always talk about it, the majority of individuals and the sector is made of SMEs, and they are rely on these payments for survival, and things are getting a lot tighter as it is right now. So it's about acting on really with your local authorities, really putting things in place. And I know we've got Rachel in here, but it's about maybe with your contracts, maybe with your payments, maybe putting things in a certain way so you get paid in time and check and have a contact person or individual. I won't name, but I've experienced, and we've experienced when we're chasing payment as well. Someone, for example, is not there, off sick, or they've changed, and you find that your payment is at the back of the queue, but you need to pay bills tomorrow, and then you're trying to chase out someone, and then you get out of office, or the numbers change. So I'm sure lots of people have been there. So it's around just making a note of it and letting them be aware as well. So that, for example, I know some firms may have 30 days payment, or when you're chasing things like that. So when you're putting your invoices in, also think about what you can do. But beyond just speaking to other people who've been successful, obviously the likes of using lawyers who are really going to be helpful and push your point, because I know a lot of providers sometimes a bit fearful, because if they raise their voice, then they feel they're not going to get maybe any business or be blacklisted or so forth, and they become a bit wary. So it's also about using us as Lcas, come to us, share maybe your concern, and we can probably speak together. Because what happens is that if there is an authority which doesn't seem to be paying one party, there's usually more than one person who's experiencing it as well. So we may be able to add the voices of maybe a few of you and take it to them as well. So also think about that. So I know if you don't want to raise a point, I know you've probably all had experiences, and if I was to say, if anyone to raise their hands if they've had late payments, not been paid on time by certain suppliers or local authorities, I'm sure I'd have many hands up. But and beyond all of that, it's about, for yourselves, we want you to be sustainable as a business, and we don't want you to fall short. And if you're it's not just yourselves, but if your workforce are really doing a great work, and then they should be paid accordingly as well. So bear that in mind. Use the chat box if you need to talk, or you can send a message to Peter and I later if you feel more comfortable. And we've also got Rachel there. You can send in a message as well in the group.
Yeah, there's two kind of practical points that come out of what you've just said, Dudley, which are important to emphasize. Yeah, one is having your own paperwork done properly, and being able to evidence the work that you've done, the services that you've delivered, and getting those requests for payments in promptly. And the other is remember how powerful pester power can be. We use it as in my litigation team, we use it as a tactic, sending someone regular emails, and if they don't answer after a couple of emails, we get on the phones, and it really is effective. If it's more trouble to have to deal with you contacting you, than paying, they'll get on and pay you. You can move up the list by using your pester power.
I agree. I mean, I could say something here that lots of businesses do as a trick, and not what the trick is. They have an email address which they use as their um, um, department for chasing for money, and they send out those emails out as well. So there's other things that you can do if you feel that you don't want to put your name on email, personalize it itself. There are various ways you can look at it as well. So I'm sure Rachel will probably atone to that, but also as well, that does happen as well. But it's also being consistent as well. I know some providers will maybe make a phone call or send an email and they don't chase up. So also as well, maybe put a time in your diary so you're chasing up every whatever week, 2 weeks, whatever you want to set it as well. So you're able to follow up and keep that trail as well listed of what you're doing as well, which I think is hugely important.
And we know to our own personal cost that this can be difficult. I mean, Lcas is itself chasing a local authority for money at the moment. And we have some experience of this. And the individual that we're chasing, who is a very nice person, only works part-time, and the dates that she works seems to vary from week to week, which could be a handy avoiding structure. And also the phone number that we are assured is correct doesn't work, and none of her colleagues seem able to pass any messages on, and we're not getting any response to email. So I'm not entirely sure where we're going to go. I think in the end we will get paid, but it's not building a good relationship with certain parts of that grouping of local authorities, should I say. Not happy bunnies. Okay, if we finished with this, we'll clear the screen if we can, and we will move on. Ali, I have made you co-host. We've extended the meeting, as people know. We've got a few points to go over at the end, so if you could whiz through, that would be well appreciated. And the screen is yours.
Thank you, Peter. What I'd like to do, if possible, is actually send you my presentation rather than do anything else, because to be honest with you, I've just listened to Rachel, and I think I'd like to just do a verbal review of trying to pull in some of the things that she spoke about and how we can help that workforce information with some of the voices that Skills for Care do. So hello, everybody. I can see some faces, which is lovely. It's great to see faces when you present. So thank you so much for turning your cameras on. My name is Ali. I am the Skills for Care Locality Manager in our area. Now, for those of you that may not be familiar with the work that we do, first of all, why aren't you reading Peter and Dudley's WhatsApp? We bother you frequently with updates. So do become a member of the WhatsApp group because it's a great place to get updates. But we are a national organisation that supports the care industry, predominantly with their workforce needs. Now, I've been working in the field for very many years, and rather than bore you with a big long PowerPoint presentation, I thought a verbal overview, because of time, was the best. So Peter will be able to send out the PowerPoint to you so that you can review the things that I'm referring to. But if you want to contact me directly, I'll make sure that the details are in there. So I really was fascinated by what you were saying, Rachel. I think that some of the challenges that you talked about are things that we have been dealing with for so many years. And there were certain bits that really came to me, and I'd be happy for you to chip in at any time if you feel there's a good way of doing this. But one of the things that Skills for Care does is offers providers an opportunity to use one of our tools, which allows you to record not only your training details, but use that recording to apply for funding. Now, I'll come back to what that actually does, but the most important thing, and I hope, Rachel, you would agree with me here, is some of the data that we now have to show evidence of can be quite difficult to collect, can't it? It can be challenging for us to be able to pull that data together. And one of the things that we do at Skills for Care is help you with that. Because of the information we receive through a variety of different areas, we're able to look at your local drilled down area and talk about some key things. Predominantly, one of the things that I would be looking at if I was sitting in your side of the table and not mine is what people are paid in the area. It reflects on what was being said earlier. I only saw James very briefly, but he was definitely talking about there being an awful lot of providers in the region. and those providers having difficulty pitching their business to the local commissioners. So when you think about your area and you're being asked to look at the offers that are there in your area to bid for, you need to think about who you're up against. And all the things that Rachel said around procurement, tremendously relevant. But it's also important to have some local data, and we can help you with that. If you go onto our website, and again, I've put some links into the PowerPoint as well, but there is the ability from our workforce intelligence to drill down to your local area. Now, when you're doing bids, you need to show that you are obviously very competent at understanding what's required of you. And I think, Rachel, you covered some of those areas brilliantly. I'm going to come back to you and use your resources again. I think that were very, very interesting, an overview, and things I've learned that after 40 years, it's always good to have a teaching day, isn't it? But you're going to need to be able to say, well, what are other people paying their staff? How are they supporting their staff? Are they offering very specific skills from their teams? And to help with that, we've got a couple of tools that I would love to be able to talk to any of you individually about how we can use some of our tools to help you with your bidding. The first piece that I think is terribly relevant is how our roles are identified by local authorities and how they appreciate the skills that we have. We have so many people who are delivering care on a day-to-day basis to people whose needs have increased greatly since I started, and maybe some of you have seen a big change too. So the skills of our staff become really important as to how we market our business and how we show our competencies at being able to fulfill a contract that's coming down. That comes down to being able to not only see what your staff have done with soft training and hard, more traditional training outlets. It also comes down to how your outcomes have been measured for those staff as they've supported people with similar needs to the ones you're bidding for. But it also comes down to you understanding other people's bidding that they may be doing for that work. So with our workforce intelligence, it gives you the ability to see what other people are charging in the area, what is the standard costings that are going out, and definite insight into your workforce planning agenda, which I think James was very clear with so many people on the market at the moment to provide care. You all have to be able to stand out at a particular area, and you have to be seen as experts in your field. So the expertise that you have needs to be assessed and understood by not just you, but your entire team. And a workforce pathway gives you the steps that you need to be able to build that into the standard day-to-day structure of your team. When you recruit somebody, being able to show them the journey they may take of learning or of delivery is a real pull for people who want to come and work for you. But it's also a real pull for the commissioners, because you can show evidence what your business is doing that's different from the other businesses. That may be showing sustainability. Rachel quite rightly reflected on the fact that we have an awful lot of information that's needed by commissions to offer you work. How sustainable is your work? Have you looked at your workforce plan, not just for this year, but for next year, so that you can offer continuity in your development? We have various tools that are available on our website, and I'm happy to meet any one of you outside of this meeting to have a discussion, and I'll send you my email address in the chat, about how to develop a workforce plan that assists you to have the right team in the right place at the right time when you go to commissioning. And a team that feels empowered and has the knowledge and skills to fulfill the commissioner's requirements is a key part of how you're going to show that you're the people that should be taking that work. I think it's tremendously important when we talk about sustainability. Often with our businesses, we look to our businesses of being able to sustain our care for maybe 3 to 6 months. But we don't often see how that business is going to sit in a year's time when we start looking at how people are going to be needing to be supported in our local area. We know things are changing. We know the NHS has to use care in a much more considered fashion to ensure that we reduce the amount of people requiring direct clinical support, but also increase the choices of people who want to be supported within their own home. And when you're writing up the commissioning information that Rachel said, I would drive you towards the culture of your organisation and clearly identifying how that culture impacts the delivery of your care and how it's impacted the life outcomes for the people you've supported before. And always refer to those that are involved in that care of the individual, because the family are a great reflection of why you should be delivering the care in your area. Your culture is vital and it's supported by all of your team. Understanding what it means, not just to the people who are delivering the services, but also to your nominated individuals and your registered managers. And ensuring that culture and value is the golden thread throughout your work ensures that the commissioners see you as a reliable deliverer and a flexible deliverer who can respond to the changing needs of our business. It's a tough time. And when we look at how we're going to ensure all these things are in place, we look at how we fund things. Now, many of you may be aware of the fact that there is funding available for training. And I would hope if you haven't already got yourself involved with claiming for funding for training, that you think very, very carefully about how it would improve your business as you move forward. If you're able to say to your providers and your commissioners that you are involved in the Adult Social Care Learning and Development Support System, which is a tremendous mouthful, we shorten that to LDAS, it shows that you are planning your training for your staff, and more importantly, you're keeping a record of that training and it's being delivered and supported in a way that is common to all deliverers. And you're understanding the environment that is available to you from central government as well as local government. Now, I've put quite a bit into the presentation, and again, in a moment, I'll put a few things into chat because I don't want to take from Peter and Dudley's area. But I'm going to put in that chat for you details of how to reach me and a couple of overviews. Please reach out, make contact, and let us, the care associations and the skills for care provisions, help you work forward into a business that doesn't just work for you today, but works for everybody as we move forward. That's the people you support, the people you employ, and the future of your business. So thank you, Dudley and Peter. It was a very quick overview. I'll put some bits in the chat and I'll send the PowerPoint to you. And I hand back to you. I think that was 7 minutes. Sorry, Peter, you said 5.
Ali,
Thank you,
always
Ali.
great
Yes.
to hear from you, Ali. I think it's important just before you come in, Peter. Ali's touched upon there is so many, not just funding from Skills for Care, but they also have a hell of a lot of resources as well. If you can navigate their website, you can currently actually go on to various things around that. So please do take a look. But we'll also be sharing things on the WhatsApp group. And I know there's other work involved with various things, from working with colleges, when not just Kingston, but other areas as well, which I know that Ali will be taking part in. So please do have a look at what she's doing, as well as other things for supporting nurses, as well as in social care and so many other areas beyond that. So thank you very much, Ali. And you'll put your details in the chat, and I'm sure people will definitely reach out. Go on, Peter.
Okay, I've just got 3 slides to put up. Now, there's 3 events, or a couple of events that you may well find useful. The London Care Record, we haven't got time to go into the background to the London Care Record. It's very important. We'll tell you more about better security, better care as it comes through, but many of you will have done DSPT. This event, you've got a QR code there. Again, this is already on the website, but we'll reshare it. It's for people, for care home, residential care homes that use certain types of software. The details are all there. Please do sign up, and it's a much more important area than people think about. Okay, there is the launch of the NIHR South London Health and Social Care Research Internship Programme. Again, we can spend quite a bit of time on this, but please do look at it. And if you've got an area that you think can be useful, contact them. If you're not sure, again, contact them, talk to them. The NIHR are doing several things. There's some useful stuff coming through. Don't ignore it. You need to look at your business going forward, as has been said several times today. And last but by no means least, our next meeting is on the 8th of October. It's on a different platform. We're running it with Citation. It's about CQC. Many of you will know Mick Feather. If you don't know Mick Feather, you will get to know Mick Feather if you join this event. He's very informative. It's very useful. Again, we will share this again, but many of you will be concerned about CQC. And that basically is it for those 3 points. Just a couple of points. Many of you, well, all of you, I would guess, would use computer hardware, software, and you may be using Word 10 rather, and Office 2016. As of whenever it is October of this year, those programs will no longer be security supported by Microsoft. And you think, well, I'll go on to the next system. If you go on to the next system, you'll find that your hardware may not run it. So you may need to look at whether the security applies to you, whether there's a problem, who knows. And just on the internet, Rachel touched on this, James remarked on it as well. A lot of social care providers have very poor internet. Don't buy cheap, buy reliable. Because if it ain't working, you aren't being contacted. And if local authorities can't contact you about work, they'll go somewhere else. They're not going to wait. So make sure you've got the quality of the internet. And let's not get onto the discussion about local authorities and direct payments or ISFs today. That's just not to be done. Ali has mentioned LDSS, so we won't do it. But please do sign up. It's free. If you don't take the money, it's going to be taken away from us next year. Simple as that. And there was a question about franchises. Franchises, very interesting. It comes up regularly in our conversations with CQC. So if you're interested, give me a bell outside the meeting and I can tell you what we see. And just as a point of interest, we are seeing a number of DOM care agencies setting up as CICs. That's an interesting approach to working with local authorities who prefer to work with not-for-profits. It's not complicated. Your accountant and your lawyer will help you. And as a DOM care provider, you're not likely to build capital assets. So it may well be a good way of getting another couple of steps up the ladder. On that happy note, I will shut up. I will thank our presenters once again. I thank you for attending. We look forward to seeing you next month. Dudley, can you please cover that 20 hours point?
Okay. So I'm not sure the question. What's the full question? I have to look it in the chat. I'm not sure, Peter. My chat it seems to.
Can we employ displaced skills workers for just the 20 hours?
Okay, so I think the 20 you can still employ people for 20 hours, but I think what you're finding is, and the concern is that how people, whether or not they are working elsewhere as well. And I think this is always seems to be the concern. How do you know that they are just coming to you? So if they have their own main employer and that's their main source of income, you can do an additional 20 hours on top of that and they can work with you. If they are displaced and they haven't got work, there is a question mark around whether or not you should be able to employ them being a displaced worker. There was the pool of the workforce which you were able to go to before, but it seems as if that direction seems to be changing. So I wouldn't go out and turn around and say, go and get 10 people who are working 20 hours per week, because that's not really what the aim of the 20 hours rule was meant to determine. It was meant to really additional 20 hours on top of what you were doing. So yes, I would don't come and say, oh, Dudley said that you can go and work your 20 hours, because I would make sure that you make all your checks with UKVI, make sure to check that the people relevant, make sure if they've come on their COS, they've got their license, everything's done, where they've worked, where they're working before, they've been displaced officially before you go forward with anything as well. And if you can get in contact with me or Peter directly, because I've found that every single situation is always something else behind it. So yes, you can to a certain extent, but I would turn around and say, without looking in and listening to the ins and outs of the individual worker, I wouldn't go ahead without consulting either us or a legal expert as well, just to confirm that, or confirm the Home Office before you go ahead, because the price to pay if you get it wrong is too high. And so that would be my final point in regards to that.
Yeah, if AOMA has added a point that their main sponsor doesn't have work for them at all, if the main sponsor doesn't have work for them, they're not going to be able to survive on 20 hours. And they're only allowed to do 120 hours. And so my view would be to turn them down, because they're going to end up going to 2 or 3 places and you could well be in trouble. So they need to be referred to the displaced workers hub in the particular area. And if it's a res, I mean, we're actually struggling with placements for displaced workers at the moment, but there are some residential locations that are taking people on. But basically, you need to protect yourself and your business as it stands, rather than risk to help. I know it's a, a help to support people, but you need to be very, very careful what you do.
And I would add in, if almost what she's mentioned, the group, I think the problem is that there are lots of workers who aren't getting hours with their main sponsor. And I think if everyone turned around and said, well, I'm not getting work with any organization, let alone displaced workers, and decided that they're going to go and work elsewhere, I think you've got to be very careful once you start going down that road. So they have to, it then comes down to the actual, their original employer not being able to satisfy their role in supplying set hours. And then once you go down that road, then I think then you can look at things slightly differently. And I'm not saying this to be bad, because a lot of providers are in the place where, especially domiciliary care, where they had X amount of hours promised before and those hours have run out, and they're sitting on the workers there not getting hours. Technically speaking, you're meant to pay your workforce regardless whether you've got hours or not. Then it becomes then trying to clarify why they haven't got the hours. Because if, for example, the employer gives them hours next week, you have to be very careful. That's what I'd say. So definitely for that, find out the ins and outs of how long the person's not been given hours for, and then you can turn around, and I would then go and question it. But there's also the hubs where you can actually get workers from as well. So I know it's not fully helped, but you can send us a message and we can speak to you as well. And we have some lovely lawyers on board as well, so we can get some clarification as well on top of it.
Okie dokie. Shall we call it a halt at that? We look forward to seeing you in October. Thank you all for coming. And again, do keep in contact. Happy to add you to WhatsApp groups. And if you're not getting emails from us, do check your spam or bulk, because we use bulk mailers and they can go into spam. And so you need to check on that. But apart from that, thank you very much. And you can have the rest of your days back.
Very quickly, in the group says, can you provide us with the details of the hub? Can you send us what area that you're placed? Because hubs are different from different parts of London or the country. So depending on where you're based will determine the hub that we would put you in touch with.
Yeah, no problem. And we will go through the chat over the next few hours, next couple of days, and we'll pick up whatever's in there. And our details are actually in the chat, but they're on the website as well. So biffo.
Indeed.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye now. Bye.